where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. That's, I think, Matthew 6:21. And we tend to apply that personally, don't we? We apply that to our own individual lives. And in fact, it has often been paraphrased as where your money is, that's where your heart is. So what you spend money on is the most overt representation of treasure. Tells you what you value, what your priorities are. But of course, treasure can be broader than money. If you put your treasure into a house, into property, or your treasure into clothes, or your treasure into your, for those of my generation, your collection of CDs. It's very different now, isn't it? It's all on Spotify. That's where your heart is. But where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. Applies, I would say, as well to churches, to a whole church. Where does it put its resources? What does it show overtly and outwardly about what it values? And it can apply to a society as well. So I think where your treasure lies, that's where your heart is. And even more specifically, where your money is invested, that's where your heart is invested. Applies to our nation, to the United Kingdom, particularly with reference to the recent bills that have been coming through Parliament to do with assisted dying and abortion and those things. Now, you see, the Prime Minister has come out and said, contradicting his Health Secretary. So the NHS, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeton, has said the resources aren't there, the money isn't there to fund the assisted dying process. And the Prime Minister has come out and said very quickly, it will be there. The NHS will be able to meet the needs, meet the requirement, meet the demands of assisted dying. And this at a time when the government has had to make cutbacks in other areas. Whatever you think about it, I personally am not convinced that the international aid budget is the most effective way of helping people around the world, but they've had to make cutbacks there to meet defence budget needs. They're currently trying to cut back on the welfare budget, particularly for those where it's around health and disability. And of course, our NHS for years has been under great constraint. And one of the issues that many people have raised during the debate on assisted dying is the lack of funding, the lack of resources, the lack of investment and support into palliative care. My friend Steve Neal has written on his blog, Building Jerusalem, and I think he's titled it something like Double Speak or something, that he's written about the hypocrisy here, that the government is unable to find money to help people when they are living, but he's saying we will have no problem finding the money to help you die. Isn't that shocking? Isn't that absolutely disturbing? Isn't that morally repugnant? Isn't that evil? But by saying we can put the money into state killing of the vulnerable and sick, we can find the money to end your life for you. The government have made very clear where our heart as a nation lies. I've talked before about these two competing cultures, a culture of life or a culture of death, a culture that has life and living and health and love and care and kindness at its centre. or a culture of death. The absolute opposite of that, a culture where a willingness to sacrifice the lives of others, a culture that will see the vulnerable, the weak, the frail, those with limited capacity, those that are perceived as a burden on society, will see them as dispensable. Where your treasure lies, that is where your heart is. And one of the things we need to be doing as Christians is saying, that's wrong. That's not where a society's heart should be. We are often told about the importance of British values, and people are assessed for citizenship or against risks with the Prevent scheme based on whether or not they live and they speak and they act in favour of British values. And yet what we are seeing here is there is something about our values that where it prioritizes death, that we want to say that is not a good value. How do we respond as Christians to this? Well, I think we've got to keep speaking out and challenging. We've got to renew our prayer, our lament, our grief at this wrong, our prayer that God will act. And we've got to act to promote and to work for and to step in where that thing that should be a good value, a concern for life, a concern for the vulnerable, where that should be at the heart of our society. We've got to make sure that in our churches, in our alternative society, our alternative community, that life and love and kindness are very much at the centre of it.